You walk into a party, and 10 minutes in, you're already exhausted. Not from talking, from everything at once. The music layered under 3 conversations. A laugh cracking fake half a second before you can name why. The exact moment your friend's shoulders drop when her ex walks in. You clock all of it instantly, without trying. Everyone else in that room is running one program. You're running 6. Someone probably called that too sensitive, too much, too easily overwhelmed. But researchers have spent 30 years mapping this exact pattern in the brain. And it isn't a flaw. It has a name, a scale, and a measurable signature in your neural wiring. In 1996, psychologist Elaine Aron gave this pattern a name: sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS, a trait where your nervous system takes in and processes information more deeply than most people's nervous systems do. She wasn't describing a mood, she was describing wiring. Somewhere between 15 and 20% of humans carry this trait at a high level. So, do individuals in over 100 other species, from fish to birds to primates, which is the detail that should stop you. If a trait survives that consistently across the animal kingdom, it isn't a glitch. It's a strategy evolution kept, generation after generation, because in the right conditions, it pays off. Before Aron's work, this same group of people got folded into other labels that didn't quite fit. Introverts, the anxious, the sensitive one in a family, sometimes even misread in clinical settings as social anxiety. None of those labels captured what was actually happening. A nervous system built to notice more, not a personality built to fear more. For decades, sensitive was treated as something to grow out of, especially if you were a boy told to toughen up before anyone had a name for what was actually going on in your nervous system. So why did it take until the 1990s for anyone to separate the two? In 1997, Aron and her husband Arthur Aron ran 7 separate studies to prove this trait was real and distinct from things it kept getting confused with, like shyness or plain introversion. Out of that work came the 27-item highly sensitive person scale, still the standard tool researchers use today. They organized what they found into 4 pieces, shortened to DOES: depth of processing, overstimulation, emotional reactivity, and sensitivity to subtlety. Each piece shows up in your life in ways you've probably never connected to each other. Start with depth. If you're high in this trait, you don't just hear a conversation, you replay it 3 hours later, turning over one sentence, one pause, one word choice, looking for what it actually meant. You notice the inconsistency in a story before anyone else in the room does. You're also the one who needs to sit with a decision overnight, even a small one, because your brain is quietly running comparisons nobody asked it to run. It's the same depth that makes you the friend who remembers exactly how someone takes their coffee, or notices the one wrong chord in a song everyone else hums along to without thinking. Give you a photo of a crowded street, and you won't just see the street. You'll see who in the frame looks like they don't want to be there. That's not overthinking. That's a deeper analysis pass on every piece of information you receive, automatically, whether you want it running or not. Ever caught yourself doing that at 2 a.m. over something that happened at lunch? Then, overstimulation. Loud restaurants drain you faster than they drain your friends. An open-plan office with 3 conversations and a phone buzzing every few minutes can cost you more focus by 11 a.m. than it costs the person sitting next to you all day. A full, ordinary day of back-to-back meetings can leave you needing an hour alone in a quiet room afterward. Door closed, lights low, phone away, not because anything went wrong, but because your system needs to come back down. Bright fluorescent lighting, scratchy fabric, a low hum from an air vent nobody else notices. Things your friends barely register can sit in your body for hours after you've left the room. That's not weakness. It's a nervous system that already processed more than everyone else's, hitting its ceiling sooner. Then emotional reactivity, the E, and this is where the brain research gets specific. In 2014, neuroscientist Bianca Acevedo scanned the brains of highly sensitive individuals while they looked at photos of strangers and loved ones showing happiness, sadness, or nothing at all. The sensitive brains lit up harder in the insula, the region that tracks your own internal state, and in the mirror neuron system, the circuitry that fires when you watch someone else feel something as if you were feeling it yourself. Is that why a friend's bad day sometimes wrecks yours too, even when nothing actually happened to you? For a highly sensitive brain, yes, it isn't imagining that connection. It's building it in real time, in every conversation you have, whether the other person says a word about how they're feeling or not. You also cry at things that don't make sense to anyone watching with you. A stranger's kindness in a grocery store line, 4 bars of a song, the specific way light hits a building you'll never see again. That reaction isn't random. It's the same wiring, turned toward beauty instead of threat. Last piece, sensitivity to subtlety. You catch the half-second delay before someone says, "I'm fine." You notice when the coffee's slightly stronger than usual, when a room's lighting changed, when someone's tone dropped half a register mid-sentence. A single cup of coffee, one bad night of sleep, a sharp word from a stranger. These land on you with a force that looks disproportionate from the outside but isn't. Not to a nervous system built to register the small stuff. None of that registers for most people at all. For you, it's the loudest thing in the room. How many times has someone told you that you're reading too much into it, right before you turned out to be exactly right? Here's the part almost nobody expects. For years, sensitivity research focused almost entirely on the downside. More anxiety, more overwhelm, more risk of burnout in harsh environments. Buried inside Aron's original 1997 data was a clue that pointed somewhere else. Two distinct clusters of highly sensitive people showed up in her results, not one. A smaller cluster with a genuinely difficult childhood did struggle more than average, but a larger cluster, raised in ordinary, reasonably supportive homes, looked just as well adjusted as anyone else, sometimes more so. Then, across a later series of studies, psychologist Michael Pluess picked up that thread and named what was happening. Vantage sensitivity, the finding that the same trait making you more damaged by a bad environment also makes you more transformed by a good one. In one study on an anti-bullying program in schools, the highly sensitive kids barely benefited more than average when the program was mediocre. But when it was done well, they gained more from it than every other child in the room. Put a highly sensitive person in a stressful, critical environment, and outcomes trend worse than average. Put that same person in a warm, attentive one, and outcomes trend better than average, better than people without the trait at all. You're not just more affected, you're more responsive in both directions to everything life hands you. That single reframe changes what the trait actually means. Not a ceiling on how well you can live, but a dial that turns further in both directions than most people's ever will. The same depth that replays a hard conversation for hours is the depth that lets a good mentor, a good relationship, or a single well-timed piece of encouragement land harder and stay longer than it would for anyone else in the room. Think about the last real argument you had with someone you love. Not the words, the half second before the words. You felt their jaw tighten, their breath change. The exact moment the conversation shifted from safe to dangerous before they'd said a single sentence that should have told you that. Everyone else in that argument was responding to what was said. You were responding to what was about to be said. Or think about the last first date that actually mattered to you. While the other person was still talking, you'd already clocked the pause before they answered a question about their ex, the way their eyes moved to the door when it opened, the exact second the conversation stopped feeling easy. You called it a feeling. It wasn't a feeling. It was data, arriving faster than you had words for it. The same way you can usually tell a text is bad news before you've even opened it, just from which name is on the screen at that hour. That's the same deep processing nervous system doing in a 5-second silence what it does in every room you walk into, picking up the signal underneath the signal before anyone else even knows there's one to find. So, the next time you walk into a party and feel exhausted after 10 minutes, don't reach for the old story. Too sensitive, too much, too easily overwhelmed. You're not running one program like everyone else in that room. You're running 6 at full depth because your nervous system was built that way on purpose, and it's been waiting 30 years for the research to catch up to you. That's not something broken in you. That's not something to fix before the next party. That's the most accurate reader in the room.